Well, I'm available to start at right tackle.
You can't see when I have clothes on.
All right. Well, there's not an even playing field. There's never been an even playing field. There never will be an even playing field.
What shampoo do you use on your hair?
You don't need to be Superman to play in this offense.
You're listening to The Red Zone.
Welcome, Badgers fans, to another episode of The Red Zone. If you missed our first episode of the week on Wednesday, you can go back and check that out on madison.com, iTunes, or Google Play. We talked to Jake Kokorowski from Bucky's Fifth Quarter, kind of about what we might expect from the Badgers with them not really having much left to play for. I also talked to Jonathan Taylor, the Heisman Trophy candidate, about kind of how he actually admitted to wearing down a little bit toward the end of last season, but he feels like he's much more prepared for the workload this year, and he kind of explains why that is. And we also talked about his faith in Jack Cohn and kind of the offense as a whole. So make sure you check that out if you haven't already. And this is, of course, our mailbag episode that we do every Friday, and I already asked for your questions, so I'll go ahead and get right to those. The first one is from Bill_Woj at Slow_Creek. He asks, every year there's always one or two players that impress while on the scout team. Who are those players this year? Actually, Bill, it's actually impossible to say right now for us because we aren't allowed to watch practice during the season. The media is not. We watch the first couple weeks of fall camp, and then they shut us out, and we don't get to watch practice. So, it is an interesting thing to keep an eye on. They're going to have their end of the year banquet here in a couple weeks probably, and that's when they'll kind of release the offensive and defensive scout team players of the year. And it's always interesting to look at those. Sometimes those guys end up making a big impact the following season. And most recently, Jake Ferguson, he was the offensive scout team player of the year in his first year on campus last year. And now he's a real weapon on third down for Wisconsin. Looks like a future star. It doesn't always work out. I remember Titus Booker, his first year on campus was the defensive scout team player of the year and didn't really pan out. So sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But I definitely think those are interesting things to look at when those come out. But in a couple years in the past, they've allowed us to watch some of the bowl practices with just the younger guys. During bowl season, sometimes they have full practices where it's just young guys to get them some more development and spend some more time on those guys. And the last couple of years we actually haven't been able to see those either. But in the past, I think a few years ago they allowed us to watch some of those. So that would be interesting if they let us watch those and you kind of get an idea of maybe some of the guys that are doing well. That's kind of I remember a few years ago. That's when I got my first real look at Isaiah Laudermilk, and you could tell he was really going to be a player, and a couple other guys too. So that's again, it's kind of hard to say right now because I haven't been watching the scout team all year, but I think when they release the scout team players of the year, and if they happen to open up some of those bowl practices for younger guys, that's going to be something interesting to look out for. All right, next one's from South Jersey Pete at S Jersey Pete. It says, any updates on Paul Jackson? We need help at outside linebacker. That's pretty far down the pecking order right there. I don't think you're going to see any of Paul Jackson anytime soon. He's I don't think he's really close to getting on the field. I think the outside linebackers have actually played better in recent weeks. Van Ginkel, I think, has really been hampered with that ankle issue for a long time, and I think the last few weeks he started to feel more like himself. I think he's playing faster out there. He's getting after the passer a little bit better, and so I think that I think even though his season doesn't look like he's really taken a step forward from last year when he was the third guy at that position, I think over his next few weeks you might see him kind of continue to make some plays. And I think Zach Bond has kind of quietly taken a little bit of step up these last few games too. He's this group still needs to play a little bit more discipline. Sometimes they get caught on the read option still, and I think that's something the position had done really well in recent years, is to always be super disciplined and not make the mental mistakes. And I think those guys are still working on that. But I think Bond has really started to make some plays recently, and he really got after the passer against Penn State. He's made a couple big plays as far as takeaways too. I think he got the interception against Northwestern in the fourth quarter. I think this last game, there's one other turnover he was a part of, at least. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, but those guys are starting to play better. Now looking forward to the future, Van Ginkel's obviously going to be gone. I think another offseason where Bond, if he can stay healthy, he could potentially have the breakout next season that we were kind of thinking could happen this year. And then, we'll see what happens behind him with Tyler Johnson and Christian Bell and Noah Burks and guys like that. Those are kind of the next three guys that might work to, kind of fight to be in the rotation. But as far as Paul Jackson goes, I don't think you're going to see him next year. So we'll have to see how that position plays out. I think that it's, right now I think the group has kind of gotten better last month, like I said, but we'll kind of see how it finishes out and see what it looks like in the offseason when Van Ginkel's gone. Next one's from Carla Was the Prom Queen. Asks who is underperforming more at preparing our quarterbacks, Budmeyer or Rudolph? Well, Budmeyer's the quarterbacks coach, so he's more in charge of the quarterbacks than anybody, I suppose. I think Paul Chris also works pretty closely with the quarterbacks. Rudolph's also the offensive line coach. He's spending a lot of time over there. But as far as I don't really know if coaching is the reason for the quarterbacks playing consistently this year. It's always hard to tell how much is, kind of how much is coaching, how much is the, talent of the player and all those types of things, how much is the rest of the offense. But, it's interesting. I think that you definitely would like to have seen Hornibrook take a step forward. I think these last few weeks with Jack Cohn, he just hasn't really been ready yet. I think he came in last year really raw. He was a guy that played high school against pretty weak competition in high school in New York, and I think that took him a little while to not only adapt to kind of the speed of the game and sort of the talent of the players in this level, but I think sort of grasping it mentally too has taken a little while. And although I think he took steps this offseason, I think he's still obviously a young player who is still learning. And I don't think we should have expected Jack Cohn to go in there these last few games and light it up or anything like that. And I think at Penn State, obviously that was a tough situation where they also weren't able to protect him. So you definitely would have liked to have seen Hornibrook take a step up this year, and that didn't really happen. But whether it's coaching or not, I'm not really sure if that's the issue. It'll be interesting to see if Hornibrook can take that step we were expecting next year, or if someone like Graham Mertz can kind of challenge as well, or Chase Wolf can develop. So we'll see what happens. But again, if you're talking about if you're asking what coach is the most in charge of the quarterbacks, I would say that's Budmeyer being the quarterbacks coach. Next one, a couple questions here from TCS at TCS_Irish. He says, what freshman redshirters who we haven't seen do you hope to get a glimpse of before the end of the season? I guess there's a couple guys. I think one of the guys that, he has actually played, but only on special teams, is John Chanel, a guy who moved to fullback when he came here. And I just think that one's interesting because he hasn't played fullback yet, but he played in his 5th game at Penn State, and so they decided not to redshirt him, which was, I thought, a really interesting decision since he's only playing special teams. And, Paul Chris said that they really just thought he was helping them a lot in special teams and kind of made the decision a few weeks ago to not redshirt him. But I also think that might be a sign that, potentially they are getting him ready to start at fullback next year potentially. Now, we haven't seen him in that spot yet, but I think when you look at Alec Ingold being a senior and kind of looking at what's behind him, and Mason Stockey is the number 2 fullback right now, and he's a guy that moved to fullback a week or two before the season started and is still really learning that position. So maybe Chanel has a chance to really kind of battle for that spot, and they want to get him as much on-field experience as possible. So if they do decide, since the decision has been made not to redshirt him, maybe he does get some reps at fullback. I think it'll be interesting to see if that happens over the next few weeks here, or a couple games in the bowl game. And then a couple other guys we haven't seen at all. I think Nakia Watson, it would be really interesting to see him. Now, someone asked him if maybe we could see him with Tywan Deal potentially out. Deal is questionable to play in this game at Purdue on Saturday. I still don't think we are going to see him. I think they're just going to give Chris James some more reps. I think they probably feel like he's earned them over Watson. But, Watson's a guy that Chris and the coaching staff seemed pretty excited about when he was coming in, and we haven't seen him at all. So it'd be interesting to kind of see what he can do, because, of course, we are going to get Jonathan Taylor one more year, but then I'm guessing he's probably going to leave a year early for the NFL, and you kind of wonder, what's going to be after him. At that point, it's kind of up in the air right now. So I would like to see a little bit of him, even though I don't think it's necessarily going to happen. And Isaiah Mullins might be one that would be interesting if we got to see him. A guy that's playing a position on the defensive line that they've been pretty thin at, but still hasn't gotten a look in. So, if they decide to maybe give him some reps, that would be interesting. Again, that's another one I don't think is going to happen, but just a couple guys that those are a couple guys that I thought might get some work, at least maybe the four game maximum, I guess, where you can still redshirt. I thought maybe they would get a few games here and there, and they haven't. So that's why I feel like it maybe would be interesting to see them, even if it maybe is unlikely that it does happen. So if a guy hasn't played yet, I don't know. Maybe they'll throw some new guys in here the last couple games because they don't have a chance at the Big Ten West. But if they haven't played yet and there's 3 games left, I don't know how many more new freshmen we're going to see on the field. And then TCS's next question: what did the Gophers do to beat Purdue, and can Whiskey do the same? I didn't get a chance to watch that game yet, so I have not, kind of broken that down and seen exactly what they did. Now we did talk to Jim Leonard a little bit about what Minnesota's defense did to kind of slow down Purdue, and he actually feels like the weather was a really big factor for Purdue in that game, and I think Jeff Brom even kind of mentioned that, how they kind of had a slow start because of the cold and the weather they were dealing with. And it's going to be interesting to see if that. On Saturday, I think it might be rainy. That's probably the worst it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be entirely too cold. I think it's, the last I checked, it was going to be a high of 37 on Saturday in West Lafayette. So maybe with the rain, you could have a little bit of a weather advantage too if you're Wisconsin with a Purdue offense that really wants to air it out. So we'll have to see on that. Now, Minnesota's defense, I think Leonard said that it was just a lot of guys making plays. If they, a lot of times if Purdue needed 5 yards for the first down, they made sure they made a tackle, for a 4-yard gain. They just made a lot of plays to, they kind of got ahead because Purdue got that slow start with the weather, and then a lot of guys were just out there making plays. So I know that's kind of a vague answer, but again, having not had a chance to watch that game, it's kind of hard to say. And it's interesting that both Leonard and Jeff Brom both, I think they weren't even questioned about it and mentioned the weather as being a big factor. So it'll be interesting to see if that advantage is there for Wisconsin as well on Saturday, or if it's not. All right, John Hermanson asks, what's the outlook for players who suffer multiple concussions? 2 and 3 weeks for Hornibrook seems like a bad sign for his health. Is there a chance his career might actually be over if he gets another one? That's always a personal decision on if you keep playing or not. Obviously, a concussion is going to heal, even if you have 2 and 3 weeks, but obviously it can have a lasting effect on your brain, as we've seen in recent studies. And I think even more so than concussions is sort of the repetitive head trauma that these guys go through on those little hits every game that they take, especially the linemen. But as far as concussions, it's just sort of a personal preference. If Hornibrook feels he wants to kind of ignore that risk of having multiple concussions and he wants to come back and continue playing, then that's kind of his decision to make. But obviously, with each concussion you get, you have to be a little more and more concerned about your long-term health. So I think if he has another concussion this year and it's his 3rd concussion in a season and 4th of his career, then I think that's at a point where a lot of guys start thinking about it, and then they start thinking about whether it's going to be worth it for them to continue. But I haven't talked to Hornibrook yet about that, and I don't really know what he's thinking in that regard. Obviously, it is a concern. Concussions are always a big concern in football, but I think it's just more of a personal choice. So yeah, I think he's at the point where if he has another one, a lot of guys would probably think about, kind of evaluate what they want to do about that. But again, having not talked to Hornibrook about it, I can't really speak for him. All right, next one is from Hunter Dabbler at Hunter Dabbler. Any word on who might enroll early this year? People are really excited for Mertz for good reason, but it seems unlikely he can challenge a 3-year starter without enrolling early. Having only the summer to learn the playbook and develop just doesn't seem like enough time. Yeah, I believe Mertz is going to enroll early. I still haven't really confirmed a lot of those yet. I've been so busy with the season. Once that's over, I'm going to try to confirm exactly which guys are enrolling early in this 2019 class and all that. So I don't have the exact list of which guys are planning on doing that right now. I do believe I've heard Mertz is going to try to do that. So that is big for him if he actually is going to compete next year, which I think remains to be seen. But I think I agree with you the fact that if he waited till the summer to come in, I think it would be much harder to kind of compete for that spot. So, but it's going to be interesting to see if he does enroll early, what he looks like in the spring and what kind of progress he can make in March and April when a lot of guys aren't there yet. So, I think we're just going to have to wait and see. Again, I think a lot of the guys on the recruiting sites probably already have the information on who's enrolling early, but I just haven't got around to that yet. All right. Bill Woj, our friend Bill Woj, has another question here. He asks, who was the wide receivers coach for Aberdaris and Erickson? Those two were great route runners, blockers, and really made the most of their talent. I wonder if that's an area where the Badgers should make a change. Thoughts? Yeah, so as far as wide receivers coach, actually, Erickson's final year, which was his best year, obviously, Ted Gilmore was the wide receivers coach. It was 2015, and he's actually currently still the wide receivers coach. But there was Chris Beatty before that for a couple years, from I think 2013, 2014. That was some of Erickson's earlier years. And then Delvon Alexander, I think, had Aberdaris for the majority of his career. So as far as making a change, I don't think that's really necessary. The wide receiving group played pretty well before this season. I think, especially when they had Cephas, last year, it's a group that played really well and made a lot of big plays down the stretch of the season, even when Cephas got hurt. And obviously, they've brought in a lot of talent in that spot. And so I think you probably want to give them another year to kind of turn things around. I think they're a group that obviously hasn't had the season you would have liked, but I think maybe if you give them another shot, I think they could come through next year. Now, you also don't want to lose Gilmore's recruiting. I mean, he's one of their best recruiters, and I don't think you want to lose that either. And I think if you would have said, if you would have evaluated Gilmore and the job he's done with the receivers a couple months ago or a few months ago before the season started, you would have. I think everybody would have said he's done a fantastic job with the group and how he's developed those guys. And so I think with one bad season, as much as Gilmore's done the last few years, as far as developing some of those receivers and also the guys he's helped bring in recruiting, I don't think you want to make a change there. Now, we'll kind of see how next year plays out and how everything happens there, but I don't think it's time to make any changes in the coaching staff after this season. All right, we'll end off with a couple questions from Zach the Great at One Sween. He asks, who will take over at fullback next year? I guess I already touched on that a little bit, but I think it's wide open. Like I said, Alec Ingold is a senior, and that's one position that I don't think people are going to talk much about as far as the guys they need to replace next year. But I think it's definitely a big loss, and I think Ingold has been really good for them this year and has done a lot of good things. And you just don't have another guy there that really has any experience at fullback. Like I said, Mason Stockey moved to fullback just a week or two before the season started, and he kind of instantly became the number 2 guy there. And then we have, a guy like John Chanel, which I mentioned earlier, a true freshman who is not going to redshirt while he's playing on special teams, and a guy that is at fullback right now. And so maybe those are 2 of your kind of leading guys to potentially play a role there next year. And it's going to be interesting. You had a really solid base there for a long time with Austin Ramish being there before this season, and then Alec Ingold playing really well as a senior this year. So that's going to be really interesting to see how that position plays out in the offseason. And then Zach's second question, which we'll end on here, where would you rank TJ Edwards in Wisconsin's all-time linebackers? I struggle sometimes with the, sort of the historical stuff. I've only been covering the team and following the team since 2014, so going back to some of those earlier guys, it's kind of hard to evaluate that when I haven't watched them nearly as much. As far as sort of more recent guys, I think that, I think you can make an argument for, maybe a Jack Sitchie or a TJ Watt being more talented than Edwards, but I think that sort of how much Edwards has done over the past 4 years, the longevity of Edwards puts him ahead of those guys. I think, Watt had really one breakout season before going to the NFL. Sitchie really had half a breakout season kind of before he suffered all the injury issues he had and then moved on. So I think I'd put Edwards over those guys. I think kind of going back even further, I think maybe I'd put Joe Schobert just a little bit ahead of Edwards. That's a tough one for me. Obviously, they're completely different positions, being an inside linebacker and outside linebacker. I think Schobert was kind of underrated his whole time here. I think, Vince Beagle kind of got more of the pub for a while there, that Schobert was kind of emerging as a former walk-on. But I think Schobert was awesome. I would probably put Chris Borland over Edwards. I think, I didn't see a whole lot of Borland. He was a little bit before I started covering the team. But I did see some of him, and I think he was just incredible on the inside. But as far as, again, it didn't seem like there's a whole lot more candidates, before Borland, and as far as maybe this decade. So I think in recent years, I'd probably put Edwards in the top 3. I'd probably put him, maybe Borland, Schobert, and then him. Now, you can make an argument for a lot of other guys. I mean, Vince Beagle was great when he was here. Obviously, Leon Jacobs and Garrett Dooley were really good these past couple years too, and Ryan Connolly is obviously Ryan Connolly is the guy that is the Buckus Award semifinalist this year. Now, I'd still pick Edwards, but they've got a lot of linebackers here that have been great over the years, and especially in recent years. But Edwards has been just about as good as any of them, I think, and the fact that he's been a 4-year starter and kind of been such a great presence in the middle of the defense for as long as he has, I think really kind of elevates his legacy. So I'm as far as, from my time with the team and sort of when you're looking at the past decade and in recent years, I'd probably put him in the top 3, but I think there's a lot of candidates for those spots, and it's a really hard exercise to rank those guys. All right, that's going to do it. I appreciate all your questions, guys, and if you didn't get a question in time, I'm going to do a live chat at some time late Saturday night after the Purdue game, so follow me on Twitter at Jason_Galloway for kind of an update on when I'm going to go live there. You can ask me questions after the Purdue game, and we can have a little post-game chat. And, of course, keep visiting madison.com for all of your Badgers football coverage. Thanks for listening.